After this attack, you've been on air and you've been talking about this. From your
Correct.
perspective, what does this mean? It hits to the very heart, not just of the Turkish economy, but also a very symbolic target.
Indeed, I think it's an attack on Turkey's heart, its largest city, its commercial and economic capital, which is Istanbul. It's also an attack on the heart of Istanbul, which is the Ataturk airport. This is the main port of entry for a majority of more than 35 million people who visit Turkey every year. Istanbul is the 6th most visited city in the world. It's the 3rd busiest airport in Europe. So it's a very symbolic place, but it's also economically significant because if this is indeed the Islamic State behind the attack, it means that Islamic State is escalating because it's taking the war with Turkey to a next level, because it's targeting the very idea that Turkey is a safe place to visit and a safe place for business. So this will unfortunately have huge economic ramifications for Turkey, not just because it will kill Turkish tourism, unfortunately, but also it will eat into investment and visitors and others who want to come into Turkey and do business there.
And the fact that the Turks have been so quick to rebuild, get that airport up and running, how important is that?
That's very impressive. Turkey has unfortunately had to face with terror attacks in the past, including by the Kurdish group PKK and various others in the 80s, and it has a really good security culture. So the airport, for example, has perimeter defense. You cannot just walk into the terminal. You have to go through X-ray and also security before you can get into the terminal. So at curbside, there is security, and the attackers actually targeted people at curbside. So clearly, these soft targets are not perfectly defendable. There's always going to be an attack at the outer perimeter wall. But I think Turkey has done an excellent job of putting the airport back up on its feet. It took Belgian authorities weeks to get Brussels airport running. Istanbul is running in under 24 hours. That's quite impressive. So it shows that Turks are very resilient. And I think this also shows that Turkey will not let the Islamic State get away with this attack. Its vengeance will come down, including through increased cooperation with the United States, that Turkey will now really want to hit ISIS in Syria, as well as increase border security cooperation with the United States, as well as cooperation with Western and U.S. intelligence agencies. So overall, I think, despite the horrific nature of the incident, this is a good sign for Turkish-U.S. cooperation, because it means that U.S. and Turkey are now even more closely aligned to combat the ISIS.
And let's talk about more cooperation. This comes in a week where the Turks handed out a diplomatic olive branch, not just to Russia, but to Israel as well.
Correct. So it reminds you that Turkey is antithetical to what Islamic State represents. If the Islamic State is the anomaly in Islam, Turkey is the normal in Islam. It's not only a secular democratic country, it has gender equality between men and women. It's also a friend of the United States, member of NATO, in accession talks with the EU, and a friend of Israel. It just made up with Israel. So it's antithetical to what the Islamic State represents, and I think that's why this Islamic State decided to go after Turkey. And making up with Russia is also important, though I think unlike the situation with Israel, where Turkey has normalized ties with that country, Turkish-Russian ties have a long way to go. But poignantly, this morning there was a phone conversation between Turkish President Erdogan and Russian leader Putin. It had been set up before the attack because Erdogan had expressed his regrets a few days earlier in a letter he sent to Putin for the downing of a Russian plane by Turkish military, a plane that had violated Turkish airspace back in November, after that Turkish-Russian ties had collapsed. Now there's a sign that relationship might pick up again, and I think if it did, of course, that would be significant, because once Turkey downed the Russian plane in November, it lost access into Syria. Russia deployed an air defense bubble there, which meant that Turkey could not send conventional troops or airplanes into northern Syria for fear that they'll be shut down by Russians. Now, if there is going to be any Turkish move into northern Syria with the U.S. to combat the Islamic State, it would have to have Russian blessing so that the Russians will not be threatening Turkey, and that would also require further normalization of the relationship. So stars are maybe aligning in Turkey's favor at a time that it was trying to make up with Russia. Now it has even more reason to be on good terms with Russia.
Stars aligning, you say. I mean, is this also the possibility of Recep Tayyip Erdogan coming from a point of desperation, of isolation, or is this just diplomatic moves and overhaul by a pragmatic leader?
I think Turkey's Middle East policy, which wanted to make Turkey a standalone power that could break with the U.S. when and if necessary, has unfortunately proven to be a massive failure. This was an ill-conceived policy which wanted to become a regional power, but without the hard power assets that go with it. Turkey does not have anywhere near the proxies that Iran and Russia, its competitors, have in Syria, for example. And Iran and Russia have done a really good job of propping the Assad regime. Turkey has failed to oust the Assad regime, and that policy of involvement in Syria has left Turkey isolated. And now I think the President Erdogan has launched a new policy of making friends with old friends, including with Israel, strengthening friends with old friends, including with the U.S., and perhaps even normalizing ties with Russia. That, of course, requires not just Russian President Putin to agree, but also, I think, Turkish President Erdogan to apologize to the Russian leader for downing a Turkish plane. Most people say that Erdogan will never apologize. I will say, with the exception to the Russians, perhaps, that this might be a time he might consider to extend an apology, how informal that might be, because Turkey really needs Russia's blessing if it wants to successfully target the Islamic State in Syria. And because the attack is on Turkey's heart, its largest city, Istanbul, the main hub of that city, an economic symbol, its tourism industry, all of that will be debilitating to President Erdogan, who has run the country successfully so far on a strongman, right-wing president image. He cannot let the Islamic State get away with this attack. He has to target them inside the country, along the Turkish-Syrian border, and inside Syria. And to do that, he needs the United States, which he has, and he also needs Russian blessing.
Soner Cagaptay, thanks so much for your perspective.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.